While other languages allow multi-dimensional arrays, ActionScript really goes one step better and allows associative arrays, or what might be referred to as structured arrays. These are arrays that may contain key pairs of values, or we might even think of as properties. So in this example, I've created an array called myArray, and then I've assigned a value to element 0, and the value that I assigned has two key pairs. Last name is the key, and the value is Washington. And then I have another key of first name and a value of George. And then I do the same thing with element 1, and I have a key of last name, value Jefferson, and then first name Thomas. And then on the third one, which is myArray element 2, notice I switched the order. I gave first name first and then last name. And ActionScript doesn't care what order you put these in. So as long as we're consistent with the keys, then everything will be able to be sorted and matched up perfectly. And then I use the push method to add two more values, and that was for John Adams and Paul Revere. And down the bottom left, you see the result that we would basically a table would be created in memory with the different elements and the last name and first name linked together in each record indexed by the different element numbers. And then I can reference those values by using the name of the array, the index number, and then a dot and the key that I want. So over here on the bottom right, I've created a variable called xyz, which contains a string, and it's going to equal myArray sub2 dot first name, that's going to be Ben, plus a space, plus myArray sub3 last name, that's going to be Adams. So the result is xyz equals Ben Adams. I can sort that array, just as we had the sort command for a simple array. In an associative array, we can use the sortOn and specify the key that we want to sort. So I can also have multiple keys. So in this case, I've got myArray.sortOn, and my primary sort's going to be last name, but then I have a secondary sort of first name. So let's say we had Teddy Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt in our data. And as I sort by last name, Roosevelt would come up together, and then the two of them side by side, or one after the other, Franklin would come first because of the secondary sort by first name. In this case, with the 5 items we have here, the secondary sort really didn't have any impact. We didn't have any last names that were the same. But it's very easy to sort a structured array using the sortOn command. I can also add a comma and use one of the array.caseInsensitive or array.descending values, and I can have multiples of those by separating those with a pipe. And we'll see that in one of the examples. So let me go into Flash. My first example here is just a little demo. I've got a text box named patriots_txt, and then I have some code that runs in an action when we first load the application. And basically what I just showed you here in terms of creating that array and loading those values that are key paired for last name and first name. And then I'm doing a sortOn by last name comma first name, setting patriots equal to nothing. And then in a for loop, I'm simply going through each item in the array from 0 to the length of the array and displaying the first name and the last name with a new line character. Let me just execute this so you can see how this runs. And we'll notice that it puts those names in alphabetical order by last name. Let's look at another example. This one's a little more complicated, and that's to create a grade book. Let me just go ahead and run this. So I have several text fields that are going to be used to show the student, the exam 1, exam 2, exam 3 scores, the average, and their calculated grade. Then I've got a button here called Enter Data. I'm going to click this button. It's going to bring up a movie clip whose visibility was initially false, simply setting the visibility to true, and I can begin to enter some data. So I'm going to put in a student name, their scores, click Submit, and it's going to store that data in an array. So I'm pushing these values to an array using a function, and then I'm going to display all of the elements of the array in these text fields. I only have one one record so far, so it's only going to display one. Let's add some more. So I've now entered several records. Each time as I enter a record, it appears in my list here. I'm going to click cancel to hide this movie clip again. And so there's all my data that's coming from the array, and I can sort that array. So I'm going to use sortOn and sort by student. So now it's alphabetized by student, or I can sort by grades, and this is going to be descending by the average. So 98, 95.3, 91. So it's going to group all the A's and the B's, but the highest score is going to be at the very top as far as average. And then there's a button here to clear the data. That way I can go back and sort by student again. And if I clear the data, my array is wiped out as far as the records. So let's take a look at what's going on behind the scenes. First of all, let's take a look at this movie clip. I'm going to burrow down into this movie clip. And so I'm now looking at the movie clip named MC Data Entry. It has a couple buttons here and a couple text fields. Input student underscore txt, input exam1 underscore txt, input exam2 underscore txt, and input exam3 underscore txt. This is all in a movie clip, so I can hide the entire thing by setting the visibility to false or show it by setting it to true. It has its own actions, and that submit button is calling this function, and I simply am getting the values that the user entered in those 4 text boxes, and then I'm sending or calling an add data function at the root level of my project, and I'm going to pass it those 4 values. The first one's a string, and then the next 3 are numbers, and then I'm simply going to clear those text boxes. When I click cancel, I'm going to clear the text boxes and hide this movie clip. When I click submit, it's going to call this function called add data and pass it those 4 values. Let's take a look at that code. So I'm going to go back to scene 1, bring up my actions, and here is the add data function that's being called. So it's being passed a string value, 3 number values. It's not going to return anything. And I have a variable called t, which is going to equal the sum of those 3 exam scores. I want to store the total of those 3 and use that in terms of sorting by grades. I want to sort by the scores. And so that's the only reason I calculate that and save it. I'm going to push it into the array. So we have an array that was created called grades. And I'm going to use the push method and push some key pairs. The first one is student name. I'm going to pass it the student value. Exam1, pass it ex1, exam2, exam3, and then that total value. Then I'm calling a method called show records. Show records is what's going to display the information on my frame in those text boxes. And I have an if statement here that first of all is going to make sure there's data there. And if there's at least one record, I'm going to show that first record. If there's not any information in the array, I'm going to empty the contents of those text boxes. Such as when I clear the array, this is what would end up getting executed. Since there's no data there, it's going to clear the text boxes. And then I have a for loop. Now the reason I did an if grades.length is greater than 0, I wanted to put the first record in because then every subsequent record should also have a new line character to drop it down to the next line. And that way I don't get any blank lines. So my for loop simply reads the rest of the records from the array and displays them in the text boxes, and I'm calculating an average value of those 3 exams, and then I'm also calling a method called calcGrade, and I'm passing it that average. And I do the same thing here. So let's take a look at the calcGrade function. CalcGrade function simply takes the score, and if it's greater than 90 or equal to 90, it's going to give an A. Equal to or greater than 80, it's going to give a B. Greater than or equal to 70, I get a C. 60 is a D, otherwise it returns an F. So it's returning a string value. I don't need to convert this to a string, it's already a string. So that's how the data is getting pushed to the array and being shown in that array. And then here's my button function that when I first started the program, I wanted to add new values into my array or add new data. It simply is changing the data entry underscore mc.visible property to true because initially it was set to false. Here's my sorting by names. So I've got my grades array. I'm going to use sortOn, and I want to sort on the student name key, and I want to make it case insensitive. So I separated those two with a comma. If I also wanted to make it descending, then I could come in here and add a pipe and say array.descending. I don't want that, so I'm going to get rid of that. And then I send show records. So my data now is sorted in the array, and when I show the records, it's going to replace the contents of those text fields with the sorted data by student name. And I simply do the same thing for sorting by grades. The only difference is I'm sorting on the total key pair, and I'm also doing an array.descending because I want to go from the highest to the lowest scores. And again, calling show records. My clear data, I'm using the splice command, and I'm going to splice starting with record 0, and the number of records I want are whatever the length of the array is. And that's going to get rid of all my records. And then when I call show records, it should clear out all those text fields and show nothing. That is how we can use associative arrays to work with linked data and keep it grouped together by records.